Hello everyone, it is Joe here from OmniPoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. If you're looking for PTCGO codes, including the stuff from Lost Origin, make sure you check out the Potown store. You can get a 5% discount on your orders using that code OmniPoke. For today's video, I'm going to be giving my top tier tweaks ahead of the Lille Regional Championships, which I will be attending just in a few days' time. So I've been preparing for this tournament myself, but of course we are at the mercy a little bit of how the Salt Lake City Regionals shaped up, and it was wacky. There was 4 Regigigas in top 8 by some very notable players. But they were all farmed, essentially, by some Arceus variants. So it was Arceus Goodra ending up winning the event, Arceus Flying Pikachu with an Espeon VMAX in second place. There was also a more standard Giratina and a fairly standard Palkia Inteleon as well, rounding out the top 8. So a lot of head scratching, a lot of knee jerking will happen with this Reggie takeover. Really, it's had a massive performance. It was still pretty good in the previous regionals, but didn't quite make that top 8 after many of them looked extremely likely. And it seems like with a few tweaks to the deck list, Reggie has come on. I will be doing a video tomorrow looking at these decks more in depth. Today I want to have my immediate knee-jerk reaction for the top decks in the game and how they, in my head at least, will be responding to the metagame that we've just seen. So let's have a look first of all at Arceus Goodra. It has just one, which will put it on the radar for a number of people. But there are some things that you probably have to tweak going forward. Now, we are on Cube Koga, my favorite website. We're on the updated Omnipoke deck list. I literally updated this today, and I do real-time updates as I update my deck list. So if you want to see this, the link will be in the description below. It's a publicly accessible document with all of my up-to-date lists. And this is my knee-jerk from seeing Hale's successful 60, taking many elements from it by adding in Chorus's experiments, for example, as one of your main sort of supporter engines, so that you can avoid putting lots of V Pokemon in your discard piles, so you have less easy targets for Echoing Horn here and there, which is really important. But obviously, the deck's now on the radar, so you have to play that Aegislash 1/1 line, giving you the regular Aegislash V, gives you a way through Miltank, which is really important, so you don't get one card tech included. Like Lost Box could potentially do it, and Bliss Tank could be coming back because that's a good matchup into Arc Goo, just because it plays 3 Miltank. And realistically, it sounds silly, but one Aegislash can get through an entire army of Bliss Tank. It can basically solo the whole deck because you play Hyper Potions, Crystal Caves. You can just slash through them, which is just insane. And then the V Max helps you out against the Kieran matchup, which is also one of your like dicier ones as well. Giving yourself a proactive option in that matchup can be really nice to have in the deck list. So, yeah, I'm kind of a big fan of having Aegislash in the deck list. It can actually be really nice in the Goodra Mirror as well, because when you have Crystal Cave and Guardy online, you can actually tank 2 of your opponent's Rolling Irons. So it's also like a mirror tech card as well. So it does a lot in a 2-card package. I was playing it before. It was on the channel list that I already played because I was respecting Miltank and don't want to lose to a 1-card tech. And I think now that this deck's on the radar, you probably have to follow suit. So yeah, a lot of inspiration from the winning deck list, no surprise there. But Aegislash will be that new differential that I think is reasonable to be joining the deck list, and then just a few personal preference changes. Like I prefer the extra Ultra Ball over the second Incense, so you just get Arceus turn 1 and that little bit more often. I'm just on 1 Parasol, 1 Big Charm. You could think about adding in more of those tool cards as well. I really want to fit more Boss's Orders in the deck list as well. 2 makes me queasy because you are a 2-hit KO deck throughout the entire game, unless you have your VMAX online and it's the late game. So yeah, just a few things to bear in mind there. But I think Aegislash is kind of the key differential so that you don't just get teched to oblivion, essentially, and still have win cons against people that just want the 1-card Miltank answer to Goodra. Let's have a look at Reggie's as well, because it was so popular, and people will be net decking the 60, no doubt. But there are new threats. We've just seen that you have a pretty bad Arc Goo matchup. I do think the Yell Horn that was played by the team over in the US. It's a really good idea and definitely helps the Gudra matchup if you can time it properly alongside the Marnies that you're playing. It can be a really big deal to try and deny that Rolling Iron and let you sort of pounce on that, which I think is huge. But also the Yellhorn means that you're not going to lose to an Ice Q tech. So it was a very clever include. You think it's just a random one of how do you make the most out of it, but you're also playing the sort of, in air quotes, bad Aleki to get a trainer card back from the discard pile. So you can cycle the Yellhorn. So even if Gudra gets out of it once, you can try it again. You're giving up prizes as you do this, of course, but you basically pass into Gudra if they're just rolling ironing anyway. You just have such terrible damage output. You may as well go for the Yellhorn plays and try and like Blizzard Bind and that sort of thing. So yeah, that's kind of the idea here with the Reggies. I have added in 2 escape ropes and a boss because we saw Flying Pikachu got second place, and I think naturally it's pretty easy for an Arc Tina to throw in a 1-1 Pikachu. I'm thinking about Arc Aegislash with a Flying Pikachu package as well. So actually Reggies being on the radar is also quite bad for Reggies in a way. It's one of these decks that people can tech for. Arceus builds can play Flying Peak. Many other decks could be playing Collapse Stadium, which is a huge issue. We could even be seeing Empoleon sneaking back into a couple of deck lists. Like Kieran could easily play Empoleon. I know you are playing Path of the Peaks, but you still have to find them. And the deck, as we saw throughout the weekend and the previous weekend in Peoria, the deck doesn't draw like butter. Like it's quite sluggish sometimes and questionable. So an Empoleon can buy a number of turns, even if it's not like immediately waving goodbye to the game with one Empoleon. It could still be a factor. So yeah, again, heavy inspiration from the list that did very well recently. But we are having to make some concessions here by adding in these ropes. I could also consider 4th Stadium and 4th Rod, because I would imagine there could be some Averys and some Collapse Stadiums coming into the format as well. So I actually think it's done so well, it cannibalizes Reggies. I imagine it's a way worse play coming into the Lille tournament because of how well it did. It's on the radar. Tech slots start becoming collapsed, and I've made that adaptation with a lot of the lists that I'll show today, which makes the Reggie deck just way harder to keep up, really. But the strengths are here. We've seen it now a couple times, have a lot of good regional performances, and it way overperformed my expectations and a lot of people's expectations, I think, this weekend. So this is definitely one of the decks that can get easily answered. I still think it's better to be on the safe side and respect Reggies than to not. But I think if you're playing Reggies yourself, it's a way harder tournament for you now, which is a bit of a problem. Giratina, I haven't made too many adaptations. I did really like Moffat's 60, where it had the 4 capture energy. I'm just playing the 3 right now and still playing 4 grass rather than going down to that 3 count. But I have weaved in a collapse stadium. I like having a couple, well, plenty of stadium bounces so you can make sure your Greninja's online. If you are using such a high count of energy, you may as well always have your Greninja online and not just get pathed out of the game. So we are going for that opportunity. And we are playing the vacuum, so we can get around Parasol and Big Charm and that sort of stuff. Because I would imagine with Arceus getting both finalist placements is probably back on the map. I was actually already very happy to play Arceus myself going into Lille right now. So I feel like it's going to be a deck on people's radars, even more so, and given confidence by its first and second place results in 2 very different ways. So having a vacuum to remove Parasols and remove Big Charms is very helpful. And the collapse can be helpful not just against Reggies, but also against Lost Box, because you can get rid of like heavily damaged stuff. So I think that's pretty nice. Again, most of these are going to be inspired by the successful lists and then made a couple tweaks here. So we are on the Roxanne rather than like Marnie or whatnot. You could think about also adding in a Marnie just in general because it's a solid card. But at the moment, just having that heavy capture is sort of leading the way. There was also Palkintelion that made top 8. And I don't think I've really adapted much of my Palkintelion, to be honest. I am playing a 70 hit point Sobble. I know one of the top 16 lists was all 70 hit point Sobbles and just no keep calling whatsoever. Showing a lot of respect to Sableye, but I definitely like the min-maxing the most, I think. This is one of the lists that I've not changed too much. I spent most of the time last week playing this deck and haven't really changed my mind on anything, really. You could think about adding in the tool Jammer if you want to have a better time into the Reggies, or that Big Charm to, again, slightly help out against Reggies, but also help out against Giratina. So if you want to make that inclusion, you could think about maybe the Rare Candy has to get sacrificed. Also, the the 2 big shady is something that I personally like doing, but it makes less sense when you're not playing Candy and that sort of thing. So this is more sort of my personal preferences with Palk rather than sort of Tect, but it's not an archetype that I have on my radar to play personally. I just don't have the temperament to play this sort of deck because it has such feast or famine starts. So I'm not putting too much time into the Palkia. I'll be the first to admit that. But if I, Gudra's just done so well, it makes me nervous. I would think about adding in possibly even Escape Rope to go alongside your cross switches. And I would think about maybe a health buff tool or a jammer to help out against Regis. So maybe it is Candy stuff that gets sacrificed here in all of that. It's not that it's a bad play at all, it's just not my play style necessarily. So I'm not huge on the Palk Intel, so that one might be a little less in date than the rest that we're going to look at today. Kieran Palkia didn't make any top 8s, but still definitely a top deck in the room. And I think naturally when you see Arc Pika and Arc Gudra doing so well, you want to be looking at some higher damage output decks in the game because Kieran and like Lost Zone Tina should, in theory, be having a good time into decks that are trying to tank. So we're trying just a fairly simple Kieran list here, just the 1-1 package of Palkia rather than 2-2. You almost always only try and get a 1-1 line in play with every game you play with a deck, so I'm trying to yoink those spaces, make sure I have a high phone count, but also just having that Collapse Stadium in the deck list. Again, not just for Regis, although you are helping the Reggie matchup. It's also in here to help out against Lost Box. And I think in the Reggie matchup, you're meant to be attacking with your Kieran V a lot of the time, because it's one of the few Pokemon that can tank hits. So you can try and like use your Kieran Vs to hit with a lot of the time. And then you have the Roxanne Collapse later, and maybe you go into a VMAX at that stage and make it difficult for them to use their Gigas. But yeah, I actually think you could tech more heavily for Reggie, and I think you can also have a better answer to opposing Miltanks, which could be coming into the format again. Again, the door's open for Miltank to be back in the meta as soon as Arc Gudra wins an event, right? And even Arc Flying P Espeon has no answer to Miltank either. So adding this into your deck list, Empoleon into your deck list makes a decent amount of sense as a one-of. Also, remember, a lot of the Tinas play no path and 2 ropes, so Empoleon is actually quite good against Giratina as well. People are really disrespecting Empoleon. They've all written it off, and that's when it's strongest. When people don't care about the card, that's when it's at its strongest. So I think low-key 1 Empoleon sneaking back into this list is also a reasonable thing if you really want to. I would also consider a Cheryl potentially going into the list as a decent way to heal off some damage against some other archetypes. Let's have a look at some Arc decks. We've already looked at the Arc Goo, so let's look at Arc Tina and start looking at some of these higher damage output decks. Arc Tina didn't do all that well, but it's definitely something on my radar. Has that higher damage output available, has that Starbirth for consistency. I am trying a Collapsed in here as well. Again, it's like my go-to tech right now. You'll see so many of these lists are playing Collapsed for a little bit of help against Regis, because I don't think you're favoured in that matchup with this list at all. You could also think about a Flying Pikachu 1-1 line coming into the deck list, and then you play around with the energy count. Maybe even just 2 Lightning would be okay in this instance. You could end up sacrificing your Capture as well if you really need the spaces. But yeah, having an extra stadium mount is nice. I mean, this is also good against a handful of other things like Palkia, for example. So yeah, very reasonable card to just be snuck into the list. It helps out against Lost Box. It helps out against Regis. That could be enough value for people to make a card include, which is what I've gone for here. I'm not happy about only playing 1-1 Bibarrel, but it's something that I'm doing right now to fit in everything. I am a big fan of double Raihan, so we can chain that Lost Impact that little bit more. I put a lot of time into these Arc Bibarrel variants ever since Worlds and before Worlds. Like, basically since NAIC, I've been playing Arc Bibarrel X, mostly flying Pikachu stuff, this whole time. So that's where my main testing focus has been, and that's probably what I'll be playing next week. One of those variations, like, could be regular Tina, could be Tina with Flying Peak, could be Flying Peak with Aegislash. One of those sorts of things is probably where I'm going to land, honestly, on a deck, just because that's my playstyle or whatnot. But yeah, I feel like this still has a lot. You have Shred, you have one-hit KO ability into even Gudra. You know, I'm playing Rope and Triple Boss. Even without the Rope things to get through Rolling Iron, just your massively high damage output is such a huge problem for them that if you pre-hit them with a Nova even after their reductions, you're just threatening the Lost Impact even after like Hyper Potion heals and stuff like that. So you still do a huge amount into that matchup. What have we not looked at yet? Let's talk about... I guess we should get... Yeah, let's talk about Mew next. I'm going through everything, really, because the format is wide enough where I think there are really reasonably, like, over 10 decks right now. My Mew isn't too crazy again. I have cut Path, actually. Path was like a mirror tech card and also helpful against Kieran Palkia. But it's something that I've cut from the list just to gain a consistency space to have 2 shoes, 2 phones. Because I don't think there's actually enough mirror to justify the mirror tech anymore. I could also see a second Marnie coming into the deck list because it is just handy. But yeah, definitely at the double Lost City because it's going to help out Reggie's. It's going to help out against one prize decks and such. So yeah, other than that, not too crazy. You could also think about like second Avery over second Marnie if you really want to respect the Reggies. But I think Mew's still fine. You know, I think you're weak into Tina because I imagine they'll still all play Drapion. But I don't expect Drapion in basically any other deck list unless someone's getting really fruity. Like, it again was getting like top 32 and 16 placements, but wasn't getting top 8 placements. It was, I think it was like the 5th or 6th most popular deck in Salt Lake, and it was a sub 10% play rate. It was between that 7 or 8% off the top of my head. And people shouldn't really be teching for something that's less than 10% of the meta. I don't think. So even Tinas could be cutting Drapion for extra spaces these days. So I think Mew's actually not in the worst spot because it naturally is good into Goodra as well. Really good at racing Goodra. When you have such aggressive gusting plays at your disposal, you have Echoing Horn as well to get around them. You have great gust options all the time. So I think your Arc Goo matchup is actually really strong. One of the weakest matchups for Arc Goodra is definitely Mew, so I could foresee this being a deck that people gravitate to in response to this last week's event. Even the Arc Pika matchup is pretty bad into regular Mew. As long as you just hit your outs to Path, essentially. That's all it really takes. We've got Bliss Tank as well. Bliss Tank's in that weird spot. I think everyone was thinking it was going to be the boogeyman for Salt Lake and then just didn't really show up too much. People were respecting... Well, I guess not everyone was respecting Miltank looking at the 2 finalists. But it's a factor in the game that you have to respect, I guess. I do think there's probably too much Tina right now for this to be a strong deck. Tina still farms Blissey pretty hard. And even some like Arc Tinas sneaking into the game are farming you. And... it's kind of on the radar even more, even though it didn't do too well this weekend. Just because Arc Goodra did well, it means that Blissey is like a better play in theory, that then means people respect Miltank. So a bit of 3D chess going on, but this is where my Blissey is currently at. Not too changed either. You could think about adding in Dunsparce, but honestly, if Reggies are playing the sniping Alecki anyway, you shouldn't really play Dunsparce. You should just play the 4 Averys and hope to slam them every single turn and just hope to get there in that regard, really. We've got Zoro Gengar, which I'm also really interested in, actually, for this tournament. It, again, didn't do overly well, but it can have a decent time into Reggie's with Dunsparce Manaphy and Sharon's Care at your disposal. At the moment, I'm playing Silene Cologne Eldegoss, so I have a way through a number of Miltanks, and also Cologne gets you through Arc Dura as well. So you're not scooping, even though you're not playing any basic energy. I'm playing a couple captures in here as well, just to make the most out of your Void Return. If you're going second, you can just capture into Diancie and Void Return nicely. Or if you're going second against like Palkias, you can develop that early Manaphy or whatnot, so you protect your bench that little bit more. Even in just worst case scenarios, capturing Guru like in sort of mid-late game situations before researching, or protecting yourself from Marnies and whatnot is just a decent shout. So trying captures right now over shoes, but that's really the only thing. They could easily just be shoes if you're not a believer in them, or you just want to get an extra switch out, which I definitely respect. So yeah, just the small innovation of Silene Cologne Eldegoss. Wasn't my idea, but it's something that I'm jumping on because I think it's a solid one. And Zoro's, again, pretty strong into Arc Goodra, and just a solid racing deck. It reminds me of Mew, like... it's got decent time into the Reggies, and it's decent at racing other big 2 and 3 prize decks. And I feel like people will bring big 2 and 3 prize decks because of how it's just done in the previous tournament. And I think Zoro honestly farms Arc decks like quite hard because it just gets to Phantom Star and Ticking Curse KO quickly. And then Arc decks really are scrabbling with that response. And essentially, as long as you get out of early locks from... early path Marnie locks, really. I don't think you're losing against most Arc decks. So I think that's a big upside for Zoro Gengar. And outside of that is the Lost Zone stuff. So Tord's deck, still absolutely fine. I know it's not been seeing a huge amount of play, but I think tech cards, again, they sort of, you kind of get caught in the crossfire. If people are adding in Collapse to Regis, it's bad for Lost Box as well, because they can have the pseudo heal option, which is a bit annoying actually. But I don't think there's going to be much like Healy stuff going around, like Hyper Potion outside of like Gudra. Probably isn't much of a thing. The Flying Pikachu isn't a huge issue either, because you have Sableye, you have Ropes and Cross Switchers, so I'm not too concerned about that. Literally, this is 59 card towards list, but you play Echoing Horn because it's still just such a strong card to have in the deck list, and I think you can get away with 3 Path now that Empoleon is far less of a factor. Still obviously a strong card and a disruptive card, but I don't think you need the full 4 copies. So that's literally 59 card towards, which is, not seeing as much play at all. Again, it was probably like the 5th or 6th most popular deck based on the graphic that we saw on the stream, but it's still okay. There are other variations of Lost Box to consider as well. This one's a Mirage Gate Twin Energy base build. I did this on the channel the other day, and right now I'm thinking about Miltank as a tech include. So again, people who aren't respecting it, some Zoroarks won't have any answer, some Arc Gudras won't have any answer. And even if they do have an answer, because you play double Rod, if you just deal with that answer with like Snorlax and Cram and Sableye, then Rod back Miltank and just get it back into the active, then they just lose. So, it's not just you have to get through one Miltank, we have the recycle of the card as well. So I think it could be a very reasonable one-off. Just in general, it can buy turns against like Kieran Palkia and stuff, so I don't mind just getting that free route damage in and force an issue for the opponent, which is kind of cool. So that's kind of also another thing in the back of my mind. And then there's also something I haven't shown yet on the channel. I'll probably show this week, because it's something I want to put time into this week. Is going to be a amazing rare Reshiram Lost Zone deck, where you have 270 damage output at your disposal. So you're hitting that really high echelon, and we have level ball for Zig as well to hit that 280. So just a really high damage output 1 prize deck. Probably one of the most high damage output 1 prizes we realistically have access to. Your deck looks absolute clownery and theme deck-like with the amount of energy that we play here. 2 of 4 different types of energy, and then the 3 of water. But you have so much up your sleeve. You have Greninja plays, you have Sableye plays, and then you have big bursts of damage similar to the Snorlax Reggie deck. You don't quite have the same burst into VMAXs where you're only hitting that 270. But that sets you up for Sableye still. That sets you up for Cram as well. So even if there's a Wash Water on a Kyurem, you're 2-hit KOing it with a Reshi as well. So if we're expecting these sorts of decks to have an uptick, you can have a good time here. And again, we play Rope and Boss, and we hit 270, which is enough to deal with the Gudra. So if you want to weave in Echoing Horn, you can have an even better time there. If you really want to, the level balls are kind of my flexi spaces right now, where they could be Fog Crystals, they could be, like I said, Echoing Horn could be one of those slots. Those are the real things that I'm debating right now. You could, even if you want to get even cheeky, go down to 2 water. It makes the Greninja way harder to use, but it could be a play that you go for as well. So yeah, that's pretty much everything. I think the only deck I didn't look at was Arc Pika Slash, but honestly, it's not too surprising here. It's similar to the Arc Tina, really, in the thought process. This is a wall breaker to get through Miltanks. The Aegis Slash hits for a key weakness into Kyurem VMAX, so that's obviously important. And then in the mid-game anyway, like once your opponent's taken 3 prize cards, Max Hack is taking KOs with Belt on V-Stars. So I think playing Aegislash over Tina is better into Kyurem, but worse into Tina, and worse into slightly worse into Arc Goo, I think, but also kind of similar. Like I was saying in having the 1/1 line in the Arc Gudra, this guy can tank as long as you have your Guardi out and you let them have Crystal Cave out. So you can actually tank heal away through 2 Rolling Irons, because they only hit 180 twice, and then you heal the 30 in between that. So yeah, some pretty cheeky stuff you can do with the Slash. I think it's basically just far worse into Tina, far worse into Hisui and Zoroark as well. That was the thing I was thinking of. Because you just have way less immediate pressure in those matchups, whereas if you just get one Tina going, especially with the list that I had with double Raihan, you can always just sort of bounce back and hit something. But the upside is this is playing a 2/2 bit barrel, so a little bit more space, and I'm playing the Pikachu to respect Reggie's. So that's a huge sort of wave of information. But I think the general consensus, I think, is that there will be people who jump on the Reggie and ArcGoo bandwagon. There will be people jumping on the Arceus bandwagon, myself sort of among them, I think. But sort of punishing that will be still Tina, still Kieran Palkia. I imagine they will still be the two most played decks going into next weekend. And then there's also things like Zoro and Mew, which are sort of waiting in the wings to really pounce on racing these other decks while still having matchups. You know, Mew is a punisher for Arc Gudra, and so Zoroark can be okay into Arc Goo as well, and they both have decent times into Reggie. So if you start prioritizing Goo and Reggie to be like a top 7 decks, it really makes sense to play one of these two archetypes as well. So essentially, my brain is frazzled with deck choice. I'm honestly between like 5 decks. I think I'll likely land on an Arc Bibarrel variant, but I could easily see myself deviating to a one prize lost box as well, because I think it's so fun. And I think you can catch a lot of people off guard with things they don't know are in your deck list, which I value quite a lot as well. So let me know your thoughts down below. What are you thinking now for Lille? I know a lot of people will have checked out of this format, especially if you're from the US, but there's still a lot of reason to still think about the format. I think it's, at least on a local level and for online events, I think it's a great thought study. And it's always a great thing to sort of have in your mind what you would play for a tournament, because it can get you in that mindset of constantly metagaming and trying to stay one step ahead from what the previous weeks have been, because that's really how you power spike tournaments. Making these meta calls aren't just taking the perfect 60 from the previous week. It's sort of thinking about how you can adapt the list that did well last week based on what you're expecting to come into the next week. So I'd love to hear your thoughts down below. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in another video tomorrow. Cheers.